I'm going to read passages from The Haunted Self, which is on structural dissociation, and this group of passages is primarily about how our attachment style gets impacted with structural dissociation, including PTSD, CPTSD, not only disorders like DID. So far, I have loved the structural dissociation view of attachment styles. It makes so much more sense to me than the simplified, like, you are anxious or you are avoidant, etc. Young children and attachment. The young child's personality is relatively unintegrated, and integrative structures of the brain are still immature. The quality of the first years of life, particularly secure attachment, is instrumental in laying the groundwork of a personality organization that is rather cohesive across contexts, such as action systems, place, time, and sense of self. With regard to primary structural dissociation, we have assumed that the personality was a relatively integrated mental system prior to traumatization. However, this is hardly the case in young children. We hypothesize that secondary structural dissociation is likely to occur as a result of the intersection of a number of factors, such as age, degree, and severity of traumatization, lack of social support, relationship to the perpetrator, tendency to avoid traumatic memories, and possibly genetic factors. The older the child is prior to abuse and neglect, the more likely action systems of daily life have become more cohesive, and thus it is less likely that more than a single ANP would develop. Tertiary structural dissociation is much more likely to develop in earlier childhood traumatization prior to age 8 that is an ongoing part of daily life, so that ANP also becomes structurally dissociated. So that tertiary structural dissociation, which is primarily associated with DID, but means having multiple ANPs, happens if you have like severe abuse that is going on prior to age 8 and that would impact your daily life action systems. Okay, new passage. Severe disruptions in the early development of attachment patterns between children and their caretakers seems to be a precursor of dissociative pathology, including more complex structural dissociation of the personality. Although the attachment system is only one of the action systems that motivate human action tendencies, it is indeed the sine qua non, I probably pronounced that wrong, that promotes the development and cohesiveness of other action systems. In particular, it regulates threat responses that would interfere with enhancement of daily life action systems. The quality of regulation of fearful affect available in attachment relationships is foundational to the developing child's freedom to turn attention away from the issues of threat and security toward other developmental achievements, such as exploration, learning, and play, which are the action systems of daily life. So while attachment is just one of the action systems, it's kind of the most important because it lets us step away from over-focusing on threat detection. New passage. Disorganized attachment describes the unusual approach-avoidant response patterns of an infant toward a caregiver who should be a source of safety and security, but is also simultaneously the source of fear and threat. Active longitudinal research has demonstrated that even apart from gross childhood abuse and neglect, a parental relational style that induces disorganized attachment in the child is highly predictive of dissociative symptomology at various developmental stages, up to adolescence or young adulthood. Although such parental behavior may not objectively be considered abusive, it overwhelms the mental efficiency of the child and hence is traumatizing. According to Liati in two 1990s publications, the contradictory behaviors that represent the infant's disorganized attachment are indicative of the existence of multiple and incompatible internal working models, or IWMs, of self and the attachment figure, implying an integrative failure of memory, affect, cognition, and identity. Indeed, Liati, in a 1999 publication, stated that these working models become dissociated from each other because the child has no possible organized way of construing such a situation. In the language of this book, these internal working models are represented by dissociative parts of the personality. Young children's innate attachment systems evokes mental and behavioral approach when they are separated from their caregiver. However, when a child approaches an attachment figure who is also neglectful, abusive, or otherwise frightening, an increasing degree of threat occurs and evokes defensive subsystems such as flight, freeze, fight, submission, or total collapse. We argue that disorganized attachment actually is not entirely disorganized. The conflict between approach and avoidance that cannot be resolved by the child promotes a structural dissociation between the various action tendencies that are evoked by insecure attachment and the defensive system mobilized against threat. In themselves, each part of the personality is quite organized with very specific but limited action tendencies restricted to defense against threat and to particular insecure attachment styles. At times, alternation between or intrusion of such conflicted parts is not voluntary and consciously coordinated, and thus behavior appears disorganized and disoriented. Another way to say this is that attachment and defense systems are organized within individual parts of the personality, but are not cohesive across parts. In chronic childhood traumatization, the action system of defense contained in EP does not occur in a relational vacuum, but rather in the context of primary and necessary relationships. Thus, attachment may manifest in different insecure and even secure patterns across dissociative parts of the personality. We have observed that some ANPs may develop quite secure attachments, while other parts of the personality continue to have quite insecure styles, in line with the literature that states a single individual may have a secure attachment with one person but an insecure style with others. Although EPs seem to be predominantly focused on defense, it is highly likely that most or all parts of the personality display underlying, if not overt, attachment patterns. EPs are then not only shaped by defense, but also by insecure attachment action tendencies that are compatible with defense. For example, attachment cry and desperate, aka insecure, seeking of attachment, fight and resistant attachment that involves chronic anger and distress at separation, or flight and avoidant attachment that involves little to no contact with others. The attachment action tendencies of EPs related to an interpersonal trauma may well distinguish them from EPs formed outside of the context of relationships, for example, due to a natural disaster, whereas the former display insecure attachment tendencies along with defensive strategies. The latter may be entirely focused on defense. Careful observation of sequences and repetitions of alternations of dissociative parts and of the particular behaviors related to specific attachment styles may reveal an underlying organization of variable attachment patterns that are often also correlated to defense action tendencies. For example, a fight EP that is resistant to attachment may consistently follow an EP that is needy and searching desperately for an attachment. In order to protect it, a flight EP may avoid attachment when ANP, who is more securely attached, attempts to deepen a relationship. Last passage. Secure attachment in early life is the foundation for self-regulation skills. It appears that primary caregivers provide regulatory functions for the infant's immature neural system. Loss of attachment or proximity to the mother, and the loss of physiological regulatory functions provided by the caregiver for various developmental neural systems in the infant both elicit a separation response that is mediated by panic. When panic is regularly evoked, it is a disorganizing factor in the developing personality of the young child. Chronic absence of external regulation, coupled with the experience of overwhelming events and the fear evoked by threat, leaves the child vulnerable to vehement emotions without needed help to regulate and process them.